Howdy. Welcome back to Dion Talk. In this video, I'm going to show you how a bill, a proposed law, not even a law, a bill that didn't even make it out of session last year, made me $40,000. Not a hypothetical, an actual real-life example of how legislation can impact us, investors, consumers, tenants, landlords, doesn't matter. Laws have an effect. In other words, we wouldn't spend all that money on the people in Congress to make up these laws that make us all this money. I started buying real estate around 2013, closed on my first duplex. I was in a really bad starting position. I had been laid off from law enforcement because of the 2008 housing crash. I was a single parent with 3 kids, found out about $89,000 in bad debt in my name that I didn't know existed until the divorce. Started teaching at a CDL school, making $17 an hour. So I wasn't in a great starting position. So instead of buying a house like everybody else does when I started to get on my feet, I bought a duplex in 2013, and then I bought a duplex in 2015. So it was a couple of years between purchases. So those first few years were really slow, but around 2022, I had finally acquired enough rental properties to be able to quit my W-2 and manage my rentals. So this bill comes out. Between 2013 and 2020, my goal was to do a 5% rent increase because taxes go up, insurance goes up, cost of materials goes up. Every other year. Between 2013, when I got that first duplex, and 2020, 5% every other year pretty much kept up with inflation. I was able to handle the increase in insurance, the increase in costs, handyman costs going up. I was satisfied with this. And so around 2020, some weird things happened. And because these bills didn't exist in my state, Washington, where there is no R, I was able to do this because in 2020, when we had a pandemic, and an eviction moratorium, and a stock market crash that recovered, and rent freeze. In 2021, I was able to go and use this strategy called the binder strategy, where my tenants ask for a rent increase to get the rents where I needed them to be. And I'm comfortable with that. So my goal then would have been 5% every other year as an increase happened. So the goal at the end of 2023 would have been to do a 5% rent increase. Because in 2022, didn't do anything. 2021 had the adjustment because of all the craziness that happened in 2020. So I would have went up 5% in 2025, nothing at the time. This bill was proposed in 2023 to go into session for 2024. So this was the beginning. This was the beginning of 2024. A bill was proposed to protect poor people, called rent stabilization. They don't want to call it rent control because we actually have a code in Washington that says rent control is illegal. But rent stabilization would say that you can only do a 7% rent increase every year. So 5% every other year works for me because when we have something like a pandemic or an eviction moratorium or a rent freeze or the bill being proposed in 2025 to triple property taxes, 1% to 3%, a landlord can make an adjustment so that we're comfortable going 5% every other year. So let's look at how did this make me $40,000? At the beginning of 2023, when I found out about this bill, instead of skipping 2024 and not doing a rent increase, at the end of 2023, I went to all of my binders and did all of my tenants and did the binder strategy. So I took the current rents, explained the situation to the tenants, and I said, hey, they've proposed rent stabilization, which means what I have to do with rents going forward is going to be controlled by the government and not by our expenses. Asked what they thought was going to be fair. So what the tenants did in 2023 is my tenants asked across the board for an increase of $3,330 per month. This was me in a year where I would not have done a rent increase, but because the government saying we are going to control what you can do in the future, I had to go and say, hey, expenses can go up in the future. What do you think is fair? The tenants across the board said, not each tenant, all of the tenants together created that. So if you times that by 12, it equals about $40,000 in profit that I made in 2024 that I would not have made because I wouldn't have touched rents unless this bill was being proposed. So since it was proposed, I went to the tenants. This brought my total rent rolls every month up to about $35,000. That's not profit. The $35,000 coming in every month, I have mortgages going out, I have principal, interest, taxes, insurance, repairs, maintenance, I have tenant turnovers, which will cost for vacancy. I have to set aside money for repairs. So I make money out of it, but the $35,000 coming in is the basis for the increase that we would normally do. So if these bills weren't on the table, since I just did an increase at the beginning of 2024, in 2025, I would not do an increase. This would be a skipped year for me. So I would normally do 5% every other year, meaning I would skip 25, and in 2026, I would do 5%. So 5% of 35,000 in 2026. So not this year, next year, would be an increase of about $1,750 per month for all my 18 rental units times 12. I make in 2026 an increase of $21K. This would be what happens without these bills being proposed. Because if the bill goes through that says, hey, property taxes go from 1% to 3%, I'll be able to go and sit and talk with my tenants and go, look, here's what happened to property taxes. Here's what's happening to all of the rents in your area. What do you think would be fair? And we'd make an adjustment to where I still make enough money to maintain the property. So I don't have to become a slumlord because expenses went up so much that I couldn't handle it. Since the bill is proposed and it could go through and I might not be able to make adjustments in the future other than the max, I have to, my hands are tied, and I am forced to do 7% per year. So the same 35,000 times 7% is an increase of $2,400, and I took notes here, $50. Two things. One, left-handed people can't write on a board. Two, somebody's going to correct my math at some point. This is not to teach you math. This is to teach you the concept of what rent stabilization is doing for guys like me, people like me who own rentals. So instead of $1,750 per month in 2026, I'm going to make $2,450 starting in 2025, which is times 12. 29,400. Can't read it. $29,400 per year increased. Doesn't seem too far off, 21,000 versus 29,000. This is 2 years. This is 1 year. The increase in 2026, because of how math works, isn't on 35,000. This is, but it's an increase of 35,000 plus 2,450, right? I'm making, it ends up being, I did the math, $31,458 in 2026, $29,400 in 2025. So this is over, if you're an investor and a landlord, what sounds better to you? $60,000 in increased revenue, increased profit, because this money wouldn't have happened, versus $21,000 in increased revenue. Why do you think so many landlords send letters to their tenants saying, there's a bill that's been proposed to talk about rent stabilization in Washington? maybe you should go testify. Because the landlords, the greedy bastards out there, want the tenants to go to Olympia, state capital where legislatures decided in our state, and bring out their tear-jerker stories of how they're going to be impacted if rents aren't controlled, so the law goes through. Because landlords can do math. And we know that if you're running a business and you have the opportunity to make $21,000 more in 2 years, and you have the opportunity to make $60,000 more in 2 years, and I have a small portfolio. Imagine the people that have 200 or 300 units that are thinking, do I want to make $1 million more this year or 4? It's an exponential growth cycle that limits investors' desire to buy because many landlords that are starting haven't realized how powerful this is in the landlord's favor. So there's less demand, which means less incentive to build, so you have less units. You have landlords that say, that's too much regulation for me, like Seattle. And in 2021, Seattle lost 3,000 rental units that became short-term rentals or were sold. So you have less supply when there's already demand. Then you have landlords who aren't stupid. So let's say somebody gets into a rental and their rents are artificially low and the rent stabilization bill won't let the landlord catch up. They become slumlords because they can't afford to fix it. Or they take the legal route of saying, you have 90 days to get out, I'm going to sell the property. You have 90 days to get out, I'm going to rehab the property. You have 90 days to get out, I'm going to move into the property. So now the tenant gets kicked out of their house. The landlord can spend some money rehabbing it, put market rents out there, get a massive rent increase. So it makes more tenants homeless. It makes people like me a lot more money. Literally, and not a hypothetical, this is what could happen. This $40,000 happened in 2024 because the bill was proposed. The bill's intent, dumb people, like I did at the beginning of the video, will say, and I saved this for the end, the bill was initiated to help poor people. No. These bills, last year's and this year's, are proposed, no kidding, get ready to take a note, write it down in your lizard brain, to get votes. Because sounding like you help poor people is how you get people to vote. And ironically, there's more poor people than there are landlords. And the landlords aren't stupid. We know rent stabilization bills are in our favor. Yeah, it's a few more hoops to jump through, and sometimes evictions take more. But if you make $40,000 extra and have never gone through an eviction, which way do you think you're going to vote on the bill? Now, as a landlord, great. I don't mind. $60,000 sounds better than $20,000. As a human, more people losing their properties, more people getting kicked out of their rentals, more people being forced to have their rents go up every year. I'm almost tempted to go to Olympia and talk against this bill. Share this video with people in your legislature, your district, and let them know what you think of it. Maybe you're a greedy landlord and you support the rent stabilization bill. Maybe you have a heart and you care about the tenants and you don't want it to happen. This is a nice short live where I can't see the text on my phone. If you want your questions answered during a live, or you just want to yell at me because you hate landlords, I get it. Every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, I do a video that lasts as long as the questions do.